At 7 in the morning, the knock hit my front door like a gavel. 3 hard taps that didn't ask permission. I had my coffee in hand, the same chipped mug I've used for years, and for one dumb second I thought maybe it's her. Then my stomach tightened, because nobody comes looking for a 58-year-old widower at 7 a.m. unless something's wrong, or unless you said something you shouldn't have. You're listening to me now, so let me put you in my little world. I live alone in a 1-story house in a small Oregon town where people wave because they recognize your truck, not because they know your story. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a garage that smells like oil and sawdust. The television stays on with the sound turned down. Not for the noise, just so the silence feels like a choice. My name's Thomas Reed. I've been a widower for 10 years. After you lose someone like that, you learn a kind of arithmetic nobody teaches. 1 plate instead of 2, 1 towel, 1 set of footsteps. I work a few shifts a week at the hardware store, not because I'm broke, but because I like hearing someone say, "Morning, Tom," like my name still matters. The rest of the time, I fix small things that don't argue back. Hinges, latches, a loose board on the porch. Control is a comfort when grief is the landlord. My biggest fear isn't dying alone. It's letting someone in and then losing them again. People think loneliness is empty space. For me, it's a wall. It keeps the wind out, but it also keeps the light out. And after a while, you forget which one you built it for. Yesterday, I broke my own rules without even realizing it. I'd just gotten home from a late shift when I saw Claire Donovan in my garage doorway, standing under the bare bulb like she was waiting for a verdict. Claire is 52, sharp, put together, the kind of woman who walks into a room and the room straightens. Around town, she's the business lady, with a condo on the newer side, clean lines, shared walls, HOA letters about trash cans. I know her mostly from a store and from small town overlap. A nod here, a short chat there, nothing that costs you anything. But last night she looked different. Arms folded tight. Eyes steady in that way that tells you something's shaking underneath. "Everything okay?" I asked. She glanced at my house like it belonged to someone else. "My place feels empty," she said, and then gave a little breath like she hated herself for saying it out loud. Ridiculous, right? If I'd been smart, I would have kept it simple. I would have said, "Sorry you're having a rough night," and let her drive back to her clean, quiet condo while I drove back into mine. Instead, I heard myself try to lighten the moment the way men do when we don't know what to do with a woman's honesty. "Well," I said, half smiling, "if your condo ever gets too quiet, I've got a guest room." It came out casual, automatic, like I was offering an extra wrench. I didn't picture a suitcase. I didn't picture her toothbrush in my bathroom. I didn't picture anything beyond getting that heaviness out of her eyes for 10 seconds. Claire blinked once. "That's kind," she said. "Not funny. Kind." Then she thanked me for the help I'd given her at the store last week, said goodnight, and left. I locked the garage and told myself my little joke would evaporate by morning. Except it didn't. I slept like I always do, light broken, and somewhere around dawn I caught myself replaying the sentence, hearing it the way she might have heard it. Not as a joke, as a door, and then the knock. When I opened the door, Claire stood on my porch with a small rolling suitcase by her shin. No drama. No tears. Just that calm, controlled face and eyes that didn't look away. "Is your offer still on?" she asked. My fingers clenched on the doorknob, so hard the metal hurt. I took a half step back before I meant to, like the air itself had pushed me. "Claire," I started. "About that, honestly, I was joking." "I didn't mean," I figured, she said, soft but steady. "But I'm asking anyway." There it was. The moment where my life could stay exactly the same, or shift in a way I couldn't control. You'd think the choice would be easy. Say no. Close the door. Go back to my quiet kitchen, my single mug, my silent TV, my safe routines. Tell myself I did the responsible thing. Tell myself I'm too old for complications. Tell myself I'm protecting her, even, by not letting her make a mistake. But then I looked at her hand on the suitcase handle. White knuckles. The only crack in her armor. Whatever brought her here wasn't a whim. It was gravity. And here's the thing I don't like admitting. A part of me felt seen, chosen, needed. If you've lived alone long enough, that feeling is dangerous. It's water to a man who's been surviving on dry bread. You don't just drink. You gulp and you choke. Behind me, down the hall, was the guest room. Closed for years. Clean, but clean like a room nobody expects to be used. A museum of just in case. My late wife's photo sat on the mantel in the living room, smiling at a future she never got. I could almost hear my own common sense saying, don't invite pain back in. And then I heard another voice, quieter, older, more honest, saying, don't spend the rest of your life hiding behind jokes. The word no hovered on my tongue. I swallowed it. Come in, I said. Claire rolled the suitcase over the threshold. The wheels bumped once against the wood, an ordinary sound that suddenly felt like a decision with weight. She didn't rush past me. She didn't act like she owned anything. She stood in my entryway, polite as a customer, and said, I can leave if this is too much. It's early, I managed because my brain had turned into a fist. I motioned toward the kitchen like I knew what I was doing. Coffee. Yes, she said, and the relief in that one word made my chest tighten. I reached for my mug. My one mug then froze. One mug was a rule. One mug was proof that I'd kept my life small enough to manage. I opened the cabinet and found the second mug I'd shoved to the back years ago. A faded mountain print. Maggie used to like it. My hand shook a little as I set it on the counter. Claire watched, and she didn't say a thing. No pity. No commentary. Just a quiet nod, like she understood that the mug wasn't about coffee. She left her suitcase by the door, handle still up. Not unpacked. Not settled. Like we were both keeping an escape route visible. And as the coffee started to drip, standing there with two mugs and a woman in my house, I felt the real fear finally show its face. I wasn't afraid she'd stay. I was afraid I'd want her to. The first thing that went wrong wasn't some big dramatic moment. It was the smell of coffee. Mine has always been plain, medium roast, measured by habit, not taste. The next morning I walked into my kitchen and caught a different note in the air, cleaner and brighter. Like someone had cracked a window in a room I'd kept shut for years. Claire stood at my counter in socks, hair pinned up with a simple clip. She was wearing my old gray hoodie, the one I use for paint and cold mornings, like it belonged to her, not just my closet. If you've lived alone long enough, the small changes hit hardest. A cabinet left half open. A spoon in the wrong drawer. The sound of another person breathing while you pretend you're fine. Hope it's okay, she said, noticing me in the doorway. I didn't want to wake you, but I couldn't just sit in that room staring at the wall. That's fine, I answered too quickly. My voice came out tight, like I was negotiating terms. I tried to soften it. Coffee's a free country. She gave a small smile. Not flirtatious. Grateful. Tired. I wanted to tell you, I handled it like a mature man. Truth is, my first instinct was to reclaim control. To say, please don't change anything. To keep the house feeling like mine. So I did what I always do when I'm unsure. I focused on tasks. I checked the locks. I straightened a chair that didn't need straightening. I wiped a perfectly clean counter while Claire poured 2 cups and set one down for me without asking which mug I wanted. That was the first real test. She didn't know my rules. 1 mug. 1 towel. 1 set of habits that had kept me steady for a decade. She offered me a cup like we were normal people sharing a morning. I took it anyway. We ate toast at the small table by the window. Outside, Oregon looked the way it always does in my part of town. Gray sky, wet pavement, a neighbor's dog barking at nothing. Inside, the silence had a new shape. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. Claire's phone stayed face down beside her plate. That alone told me she was trying not to drag her old life into my quiet one. But the tension sat in her shoulders. You don't carry yourself like that unless you've been braced for impact for a long time. You didn't have to come, I said, and immediately regretted the words. It sounded like blame. Her eyes lifted. I know. I cleared my throat. I mean, you didn't have to come here. You could have stayed with a friend. She let out a slow breath. Friends are complicated when you're the headline that never says the whole truth. There it was, something real. Not details, not gossip, but the edge of a story. I could have asked more. I could have leaned in, shown interest, offered comfort. I felt that fork in the road inside me. Curiosity on one side, self-protection on the other. If I asked, I'd be letting her closer. And closeness, for me, comes with an invoice. So I nodded like I understood and kept my questions to myself. After breakfast, I tried to return us to temporary. I showed her the guest room like a landlord showing a rental. Clean sheets, extra blanket, the small dresser I never use. Claire stood in the doorway and didn't step fully in. Her suitcase was still by the front door, handle up. You can put it away, I said. Not yet, she replied. I don't unpack until I'm sure I'm staying somewhere by choice. Later, I went to the hardware store for my shift, and the whole day I felt out of alignment. Every morning, Tom landed differently because I knew I'd left someone in my house. Not a stranger, not family, something more dangerous. A person with needs. When I came home, I heard movement in the kitchen. A drawer sliding. Water running. My heart sped up like there was a fire, even though everything was fine. Claire looked up from the sink. I washed the dishes, she said. I hope that's okay. It's okay, I answered, but my brain was screaming. Those were mine to wash. Mine to decide. If you've ever lost someone, you know how grief can turn into control. You can't control what happened, so you control what's left. You build routines like guardrails. And when someone steps over them, kindly, innocently, you feel exposed. That evening, we ate something simple, soup from a can, because neither of us had the energy for performance. The living room felt smaller with two people in it. The TV glowed, still muted, but Claire kept glancing at it like she expected sound to suddenly arrive and fill the space between us. Her eyes drifted to the mantel, to Maggie's photo. I saw it coming and couldn't stop it. Is that your wife? She asked. Yeah, I said. Claire held my gaze. Do you still talk to her? The question landed in me like a hand pressed on a bruise. I could have answered gently. I could have said, sometimes. I miss her. I keep her close. I could have let the truth be soft. Instead, my fear made me sharp. No, I said. She's not here to talk back. Claire's face tightened, just a flicker, but I caught it. Like I'd slapped the air. Silence rushed in to cover what I'd done. I wanted to fix it. The words were already bitter on my tongue. But I've never been good at apologies in the moment. I stood up and pretended I needed to check something in the garage. Out there among my tools, I breathed like a man trying to outrun his own sentence. Part of me insisted I'd just been honest. Another part knew honesty isn't the same as kindness. And the truth was, I did talk to Maggie sometimes, just not in a way I'd ever admit out loud. In my head, in the quiet, when the house creaks at night, I came back inside with my shoulders set, like that could hold the house together. Claire was in the guest room doorway, holding my gray hoodie in her hands, as if she'd suddenly remembered it wasn't hers. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have. It's fine. I cut in, too fast again. Then I forced my voice lower. It's just an old habit. She nodded, and something in her expression told me she'd heard the deeper meaning. Don't touch what hurts. Later, when the lights were low, she stood near the front door where her suitcase still waited. Tom, she said quietly, are you going to throw me out first? If I stay longer than you expected? That question wasn't about the suitcase. It was about being unwanted twice. I looked at her and felt my internal choice rise again. I could reassure her, give her a promise, make the house feel safe for her. Or I could keep my distance, keep my heart behind its wall. My mouth opened, and I waited too long. The pause stretched until it became an answer all by itself. Claire's eyes dropped to the suitcase handle. She gave a small, controlled nod, like she'd learned not to beg for certainty. Okay, she said. Good night. She turned and walked down the hall, and the soft click of the guest room door sounded like a lock. On her side, not mine. I stood there in my dim living room, staring at Maggie's photo, and the worst part wasn't that I'd hurt Claire. The worst part was realizing I'd done it without raising my voice, without drama, with nothing but a silence I'd practiced for 10 years. The first time I heard Claire's old life bleeding into my quiet one, it wasn't a knock at the door. It was her voice, low, controlled. The kind you use when you're trying not to sound like you're asking for mercy. Coming through the wall at 6:18 a.m. I was half awake, staring at the ceiling, and I caught a few words like they were radio static. Yes. I understand. No, that's not what happened. Then a pause. Then 48 hours. I sat up in bed with that number lodged in my chest, because now there was a clock inside my house, ticking louder than my own heart. You've got to understand what my mornings used to be. Same route, same pace, same silence I could predict. With Claire here, the house started to feel like a place where anything might happen. The coffee smelled different again, stronger, a little sharper. And the kitchen had that faint glow of a laptop screen reflecting off the window, like a tiny city had moved into my country road. She sat at the table with her shoulders squared, hair pinned back, my mug in her hands as if it was an anchor. When she saw me, she closed the laptop fast, not guilty, just private. Sorry, she said. Work habits. It's fine, I told her, because I keep saying that when it isn't fine. I reached for my routine, like a railing. Open cabinet. Spoon. Filter. But my eyes kept sliding to the phone beside her laptop. 3 missed calls. A name I didn't recognize. A string of messages previewed on the screen. Corporate language. Legal language. The kind of words that don't care if you're tired or scared. I wanted to ask. That was my first internal choice of the day. Ask her what's happening and risk becoming involved, or pretend I didn't notice and keep my life clean. I chose the coward's middle path. You hungry? I asked instead. Claire gave me a look that said she understood the dodge. Not really, she replied. But I can eat. We made eggs in near silence. I watched her hands, steady, efficient, and it hit me how many roles she'd probably played in her life. The woman at the store who knew exactly what she needed. The neighbor who smiled politely. And now this version. A woman sitting in a borrowed hoodie, acting calm while a clock ticked inside her. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. My son, Mark. I'm in town, his text read. Stopping by. No question mark. Mark is 32, practical, protective in that way grown kids get when they realize their parents are breakable. He's a good man. But good men can still bulldoze without noticing. I didn't warn Claire. I told myself there was nothing to warn her about. Another lie. When Mark's truck pulled into my driveway, Claire stood at the window, her expression unreadable. You expecting someone? She asked. My son, I said. My voice sounded too casual, like I was naming the weather. Mark knocked once and walked in the way family does, carrying a paper bag of groceries like a peace offering. Dad, he said, and then his eyes landed on Claire. The whole room shifted. Not loudly, just tightened. He recovered fast. He's trained in politeness, but the surprise stayed in his posture. Oh, hi. Claire stepped forward, calm and composed. Claire Donovan, she said, offering her hand like she was in a boardroom, not my living room. Mark shook it, but his grip was careful, measuring. Mark, he replied. Dad didn't mention you had company. Dad didn't know I'd be company, Claire said, and her honesty was sharper than any insult. I should have stepped in right there. I should have framed it, protected the moment, made it clear she wasn't some random complication. Instead, I did what I've done my whole life when tension rises. I tried to joke my way around it. Well, I said, forcing a small laugh, I guess I'm still full of surprises. Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, he said. Apparently. We sat at the kitchen table. Mark unpacked groceries like he was claiming territory, placing fruit in my bowl, bread on my counter, reorganizing without asking. Claire watched, polite and still, hands folded. I could feel her withdrawing inch by inch. Mark asked the usual questions. How I was sleeping, if I'd been taking my vitamins, whether the roof leak was fixed. Then, too smoothly, he asked Claire, So you live nearby? I did, she answered. I'm between places. Mark nodded like he'd just confirmed something. Between places can be risky, he said, turning to me. Dad, you okay with this? There it was. The implication he wouldn't name. A woman shows up, a man my age opens the door, and suddenly everyone thinks they're protecting you from being fooled. I felt heat rise in my neck, not at Mark exactly, but at the old humiliation of being treated like I can't make decisions in my own house. "I'm fine," I said. "It's temporary." The moment the word left my mouth, I saw Claire's eyes flicker. A tiny wince, like a door closing softly. I told myself it was a neutral word. Responsible. Safe. But it landed on her like a verdict. Mark leaned back, satisfied. "Good," he said. "Temporary is smart." Claire stood. "Excuse me," she said, and walked down the hall toward the guest room without rushing. Her composure was almost worse than anger. It meant she'd learned how to swallow things. Mark watched her go, then lowered his voice. "Dad, you don't know what's going on with her." "I know enough," I snapped, then softened because I hated myself for snapping. "She needed a place. That's all." Mark didn't argue. He just looked at me the way sons look at fathers when they're scared of losing them. "Just be careful," he said. After Mark left, the house felt colder. Claire stayed in the guest room with the door half closed. I hovered outside it like a man outside a church, not sure if he belongs inside. Finally, she opened the door and met my eyes. "I heard you," she said. Not accusing. Stating. "Claire, it's fine," she repeated my favorite lie. And that's when I knew I'd handed her my worst habit like a tool. She walked back to the kitchen and picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over a number. "They gave me 48 hours, she said. "The bank. Former partners. A path back." She said it like the words tasted wrong. "Good money. A contract. Public rehabilitation." "But it's conditional." "Conditional how?" I asked before I could stop myself. "On my silence," she said. "On me playing the role they need." She looked up. "I'm not asking you to solve it. I'm just telling you why I'm here." I felt my chest tighten in a different way now. Her life wasn't paused. It was moving, even if she stood still. And mine was a room with the sound turned down. I saw the next choice clearly. Tell her to take the offer and leave, so my house returns to quiet, or ask her to stay, and accept that quiet might never mean safe again. I didn't give her either. I just nodded, the way a man nods when he's afraid of choosing wrong. That night, I lay in bed listening to her footsteps in the hall, the soft click of her door, the phone buzz muffled through the wall. 48 hours. I stared into the dark and realized the most frightening thing wasn't losing her. It was how fast my mind was already planning for it, as if preparing would make it hurt less. If you want to know what panic looks like in a man my age, it isn't shouting or slamming doors. It's me standing in my own hallway, listening to a printer whir at midnight like a strange animal, wondering when my house stopped being a shelter and turned into a waiting room. Those 48 hours didn't arrive with drama. They arrived with calendars, conference calls, and the kind of clipped sentences people use when they think feelings are inefficient. Claire set up at my kitchen table like it was a temporary command center. Laptop open, legal pad stacked, charger cords snaking across my counter. Every time her phone buzzed, my shoulders jumped. Not because I was scared of the sound. Because the sound meant her real life was reaching through my walls. I tried to keep my routine anyway. I went to the store for my shifts. I swept the garage. I ate the same plain lunch. But everything felt off. My coffee didn't smell like mine anymore. The floors seemed to creak louder, like the house itself was complaining about extra weight. Even the air had movement. Claire pacing while she listened, stopping to type, breathing out slowly before she spoke. I'd spent 10 years training myself to live with as little motion as possible. Now motion lived with me. One afternoon, I came home and found her on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, gaze fixed on the wet street like she was watching for something to crash. She saw me and turned away, lowering her voice. I caught fragments. "I'm not signing that. No, I understand the optics. I'm not your scapegoat." When she hung up, she didn't look at me right away. "Sorry," she said, like she'd spilled something. "You don't have to apologize for having a life," I told her. It sounded generous, but inside I was thinking the quiet is mine, the calm is mine, don't bring a storm into it. That's the ugly truth about control. It pretends to be responsibility. It says I just want peace. But what it really means is I don't want to feel helpless. Mark came back the second night. He didn't announce it this time. His headlights just washed across my living room, and suddenly there he was at the door with that protective look. Claire was in the kitchen, laptop open again, and Mark's eyes went straight to her like a finger pointing. "Still here," he said, not rude, just firm. "Yeah," I answered too fast. "Just for a bit." Claire's hands paused over the keyboard. She didn't turn around, but I saw her shoulders tighten. Mark pulled me toward the hallway like he was trying to keep his voice private. "Dad, I'm not judging," he said. "I'm worried. You don't know how people work when they're desperate." The sentence landed like I'd been made foolish in my own house. I had a choice right there. Tell my son to stop, draw a line, make Claire feel defended, or let it slide and keep the peace with Mark. I chose the easier piece. I did what I always do when I'm cornered. I minimized. "She's not staying," I said, light, almost casual. "It's temporary." I didn't even notice Claire had stepped into the doorway until her voice came from behind us. "Of course it is," she said. Calm. Controlled. That calm was worse than anger, because it meant she'd filed the words away, where they could do damage later. Mark looked relieved, like the situation had been categorized. He patted my shoulder and left after 10 more minutes of small talk. When the door closed, the house felt hollow in a new way. Claire went back to the kitchen, but she wasn't typing anymore. She was staring at her screen like it was a mirror showing her something she didn't want to see. I hovered near the sink, pretending to rinse a glass. "Claire," I started. "About what I said, you said what you meant," she replied, still not looking at me. "It's fine." There's that phrase again, used like a bandage over a deep cut. Later, around 10, the lights were low, and the rain had started, Oregon rain, steady. I walked past the guest room and saw a thin strip of light under the door. I should have knocked. I know that. But my fear kept whispering that I had a right to know what was happening under my roof, as if a roof gives you ownership of someone's decisions. I pushed the door open. Claire sat on the edge of the bed with her laptop on her knees. The screen was bright, a block of text and a signature line. I saw the words offer, reinstatement, non-disparagement. I didn't read the whole thing, just enough to understand it was a rope being lowered from the world that had let her fall. She snapped the laptop closed, not like a child caught doing wrong, but like a woman protecting the last piece of privacy she had left. "Tom," she said quietly, "please don't." I should have apologized and backed out. That was the decent choice. The other choice, the one my fear wanted, was to say something that would restore my control, even if it hurt. I sat on the chair by the dresser, like I belonged there. "They're offering you a way back," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost fatherly. "That's good, isn't it?" Claire's eyes stayed on mine. "Good for who?" "For you," I answered too quickly. And then I made it worse. "You're stuck here, Claire. In this little town. In my spare room. That offer, it's probably better. It puts you back where you fit." The words left my mouth smooth and reasonable, and that's what makes me sick now. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't cruel on purpose. I was doing something colder. I was giving permission for her to leave, so I wouldn't have to admit I was scared she might matter. Claire didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just stared at the closed laptop for a long second, then set it on the nightstand like it was suddenly heavy. "Okay," she said. "Then I'll go earlier." My stomach dropped. "I didn't say you had to. You didn't have to," she replied, standing up. "You already decided what this is." She picked up her suitcase handle from beside the dresser. Yes, she'd kept it in here now, still half-packed, and in that simple motion, the room changed. It wasn't a guest room anymore. It was an exit. I went back to my bed and lay there listening to the rain and the quiet that I'd wanted so badly. It didn't feel safe. It felt empty again, only now it had a face attached to it. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and tried to act normal. Around noon, my coworker Hank mentioned he'd seen Claire at the diner weeks ago talking about consulting for small businesses. "Smart lady," he said. "Sounds like she was planning to settle in, help folks out." I froze with a box of screws in my hands. Settle in. The phrase hit like a delayed punch. She hadn't been using my house as a pit stop. She'd been trying to build something smaller and honest. And I'd handed her a shove toward the world that hurt her, just to keep my own fear comfortable. That's when I understood my mistake wasn't that I let her in. It's at the moment she started to feel real. I tried to turn her back into a temporary joke. I woke up that morning with the wrong kind of quiet in the house. Not the familiar one I'd trained myself to live with for years, but a hollow quiet that felt unfinished, like a sentence cut off before the point. The second mug was gone from the counter. The charger cord wasn't coiled near the outlet anymore. Claire's presence had already started to fade, and that scared me more than if she'd slammed the door on her way out. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the sink, telling myself that this was what I wanted. Order. Predictability. No risks. But the truth, which I avoided like a loose floorboard, was simpler. I had pushed her away before she could decide whether to leave me. And that difference mattered. I spent half the morning rehearsing justifications in my head. You didn't promise anything. You were honest. You didn't trap her. Those sentences sounded reasonable, but they didn't feel true. They felt like paperwork. Around noon, I called my son. Not because I needed advice, but because I couldn't carry the weight of my own reasoning anymore. When he answered, I didn't let him lead. I messed up, I said. Silence on the line. Then, carefully, how? I told him everything I hadn't said before. That when he warned me, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like confirmation of my worst fear, that I was old enough to be dismissed. That when I called Claire temporary, I wasn't thinking about her at all. I was thinking about how easily I could go back to the life I knew. I didn't choose safety, I said. I chose fear that looks like safety. He didn't interrupt. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lower, less certain. Dad, you're allowed to want something without knowing how long it'll last. That sentence stayed with me after the call ended. Wanting something. I'd forgotten that was still an option. The rest of the day passed slowly. I didn't go to the store. I didn't fix anything. I sat on the porch and watched cars pass like I was waiting for one I'd recognize. In the late afternoon, I heard through the small-town grapevine that Claire had turned the bank down. Not impulsively, professionally. She'd refused the conditions, set her terms, closed the door cleanly. She hadn't been running to my house to hide. She'd been standing still long enough to decide who she wanted to be next. And I'd mistaken that stillness for weakness. That was the moment I made my internal choice, the one I'd been avoiding since the first knock on my door. I could let this end quietly and tell myself it was mutual. Or I could risk being clear, knowing clarity doesn't guarantee forgiveness. I called her just before sunset. She didn't answer right away. When she did, she sounded calm, distant, like someone who'd already finished a chapter. I'm not calling to ask you back, I said before she could speak. I'm calling because I said things that weren't honest. Another pause. Go on. I told myself I was being rational. What I was actually doing was clearing space, so I wouldn't have to change. I won't do that again. I waited. I don't want promises, she said finally. Good, I replied. I don't trust them either. We agreed to meet on the porch. Not inside. Not somewhere symbolic. Just where things had actually happened. She arrived without a suitcase this time. No armor. No urgency. We stood facing each other with a respectful distance between us. I won't joke anymore, I said. If I ask you to stay, it's not because I need filling. It's because I'm ready to share space without deciding the ending in advance. Claire studied me the way people do when they're checking for cracks. I'm not rebuilding my life around you, she said. I wouldn't ask you to, I answered. I just don't want to hide from it anymore. That was the truest thing I'd said in years. We didn't hug. We didn't resolve everything. We walked instead, down the familiar path toward the river, side by side, leaving room for each other to exist without claiming. The water moved the way it always had, indifferent and steady. Sometimes our elbows touched. Sometimes they didn't. And for the first time since my wife died, I didn't feel like I was replacing a life or starting a new one. I felt like I'd finally stopped negotiating with fear. Not a beginning, not an ending, just the present, held without apology.